Happy Father's Day. Happy Father's Day, everyone. Appreciate you dads out there. And pray for Dad today. And man, it's wonderful to remember Dad. And Jackie Urbino was also, he's here at this service, but he was at the early service too. As a matter of fact, he gave the pastoral prayer. And he prayed so beautifully because, well, he prayed for those guys who have never been biological fathers, but have been mentors as men. And as a result have been difference makers, positive difference makers in lives. And he prayed for them as fathers. And there are people like that in my life too. And I remember them on Father's Day. So let's continue to just, man, let's make that a celebration. Again, we're preaching a series of sermons we call Uno, referencing oneness and harmony. And the name of introducing it, annual conference isn't the only place that I've been away to in the last few days. It's a long story, but I got to go across the pond. And I got to go to London, and I got to go to Normandy. And I was there for the 70th anniversary of the Normandy invasion, the 70th anniversary of D-Day. That's where I was. And like I told you, I'll probably come back mentioning some of those episodes in sermons. And here goes. That's Normandy. And that was a trip to the beach for thousands of young men who were teenagers. Their average age was 19 years old. Someone told us that when they were coming across, they were laughing and joking about going to the beach. And a terror met them there that I cannot relate to. It's reforested now. That picture doesn't capture how far those soldiers had to run in withering combat and a terror to which I cannot relate. And it's reforested too. Those dunes, it just looks like it's extra green, but there's actually a forest there that had been cut down to make it easier to defend. And now it's turned into a peaceful place and a beautiful place. And I was looking forward to seeing all the sights that I had read about prior to making my trip over that way. But it being the 70th anniversary, world leaders came. There were 52 world leaders in Normandy that day. The Queen of England was there. The President of France was there. Our own president was there. I got to see them. I got to hear both the French President Hollande and President Obama give speeches there at the Colville Cemetery at Omaha Beach. And they both gave very appropriate and inspiring speeches. I've noticed that whenever politicians get up and speak these days, they usually have a backdrop of people. And in this instance, D-Day veterans were the backdrop for the president. And there they sat while both the French president and the American president gave their speeches. There was a crowd of 2,000 that were invited to go. 20,000 showed up. And the security was so tight that we weren't allowed to go see much. But everyone went and got in their buses to leave and got stuck in about a 3-hour-long traffic jam. And our group just decided we'd stay there in the cemetery. And so we walked up and down, row after row, after row after row of white crosses and read the names of soldiers that gave their lives. We even walked down to the beach and tried to imagine what it had been like to make that journey from there to their goal. Tried our best to reimagine it. And 3 hours later, we made our way back up to the parking area, and at that point, the only people that were left were the veterans. There they were, maybe a few family members. And we had them all to ourselves. Now keep in mind, I was traveling with about a dozen history majors that were all between the ages of 19 19 and 21. And when I was that age, I thought people who were in their 30s were ancient. I thought Jesus would be back by the time I got that age. And people who were retirement age, I could not relate to. And people who were in their 90s, because every one of those vets were in their 90s, I couldn't relate to. And there sat the veterans waiting for their transportation to arrive. And there we were. And the veterans were minding their own business. And the students were minding their own business. And so I kind of put on my pastoral visitation hat, because pastors get to visit elderly people on a regular basis. So I walked up and I engaged this guy first. And I talked with him, and the college students kind of looked at him and said, "Wow, look at him. He talks." And eventually the group from Flagler College came and eavesdropped on the conversation. And their professor had told them, if you get to meet a veteran, have some questions ready in advance. And the fact is, most of these veterans went and ended the war and came home and started lives in America and never talked about their experience. How many of y'all know a vet from that area that never talked about their experience? Right. Just about all of them hardly ever talked about it. So here were these two generations looking at each other, beginning to warm up to each other. And here were students who had questions ready, who had read up. And here were these veterans that had lived it. They saw these students, they saw these history majors gathering around them. And you could see this thawing. And you could sit there and see a look on their face that said, wow, here are some young people who are interested in my contribution to history. Here are some people who are interested in my contribution to the world's story. And those veterans began to talk. That one was the first one. He said, if you have any questions, ask and I'll answer away. And we met a sailor who was brought in to sink a cargo ship loaded with dynamite right there in 18 fathoms off Utah Beach in an attempt to make a wave break. And we met this guy who jumped the night before with the airborne and fought in a place called San Mariglis. And we met people from Patton's division. And we met people from all over the place, telling their stories. And we met young people who were listening to their stories, listening to every word. Something beautiful took place. Now, usually those would have been strangers that passed in the night, ships that would have sailed in the night and not even acknowledged one another's presence. But what we saw instead was a very beautiful mixing of lives and generations and stories and appreciations. And it takes me to the truth of God's Word that I want you to read with me. I'm sorry it's in such dark